Welcome to Junk Food Fit. I'm Professor Cookie, and today's episode is all about carbs. My biggest pet peeve when it comes to carbs is when people say that they don't eat carbs. Well, that's a problem because your body needs carbs to survive. But it's okay because the people who say those things don't really know what a carb is. Because oftentimes when I hear people say, I'm going on a diet, I'm not eating any carbs, it means they're staying away from foods that are high in carbohydrates. What it really means is when they're on this diet, they're staying away from pasta, they're staying away from bread, they're staying away from items that have lots of carbs in them. Cake, cookies, those things. But they mistakenly just generalize it and say, I'm staying away from carbs, I'm not eating carbs. Oftentimes people say bread is a carb. Well, that's actually incorrect. Bread is not a carb. It contains carbs. So that is the biggest thing that I want you to know and take away from this video, is that carbs are actually simple things, that most things that we actually eat contain carbs. They aren't actually carbs themselves. So the only thing that we might consume that is an actual carb is table sugar. So this is my pack from my cupboard. It is pure sugar. Literally, this is a carb. Everything else contains carbs. So I have a container of almonds. Even if you look on the label, it says each serving contains 6 grams of carbohydrates. But there's also fat, and there's also protein, and there's also other things in there. So this isn't a carb, but it contains carbs. It goes to something a little bit closer to sugar. I have maple syrup. Maple syrup, this was a little bit tricky, but it is not a carb itself. It contains carbs because if you think about it, it is carbs, but it's a liquid. So that means there's some water in there and there's some other things. If you look at the label, it has 4 milligrams of sodium, 27 grams of carbs, of which 24 of those are sugars. So this one's a little bit tricky. It's much closer to the table sugar, but it's still not pure sugar. So this one, it does have nutrition facts. It has total carbohydrates 4 grams, sugars 4 grams. And the ingredient line, it probably doesn't have one because that would be kind of silly because it is sugar. Yeah, there's no ingredient line. But if you calculate that, so it says 1 serving is 1 teaspoon, calories 15, total carbs is 4 grams. So on that label, we have, where's my marker? The reminder that in carbs, each gram of carbohydrate has 4 calories. So remember that carbs, it's 4 calories per gram. So if you had a gram of sugar, it would be 4 calories. Now that teaspoon the teaspoon of sugar has 15 calories. And it does say a teaspoon of sugar has 15 calories. It does say that in that teaspoon of sugar, it's 4 grams of carbs. So if you multiply 4 grams by 4 calories per gram, it should actually equal 16 calories. But when it comes to nutrition facts panels and the labels, there's some rounding involved. So instead of putting 16 calories, the label actually just rounded to 15. Okay? Example here is oatmeal. So oatmeal is not a carb. It does contain carbs. Even it is one of those carb foods that we often think about, but it actually has in 1 serving 28 grams of carbs. It also has 5 grams of protein. So it's high-ish in protein. It has a good amount of protein in it, and it also has 2.5 grams of fat. So oatmeal is not a carb, but it does contain a good amount of carbohydrates in it, 28 grams. And then even in the carbohydrates, there's different kinds of carbohydrates. So it becomes these terms. There's monosaccharides, which means
Mono is single, so it's a single saccharide. Then we have disaccharides, which are 2. Then we have our polysaccharides. Poly means many. So these are the larger ones, like starch and fiber. Those are polysaccharides. So they all fit under the word carbohydrate. So you'll have monos and dis are your sugars, and then you have polysaccharides, which are more commonly things like starch and fiber. So on this label we'll have 28 grams of total carbohydrates in a serving, but there's within those 28 grams, 4 of those are dietary fiber, and then they even break down the dietary fiber. There's 2 grams of soluble fiber and 2 grams of insoluble fiber. So the carbohydrate umbrella is quite large, but just remember that something like an oatmeal is not carbs. It contains carbs, and those carbs that it contains, it could be something like sugar, your table sugar, it could be sucrose, or it could have starch or other fibers in there. So I've mentioned sugars a couple of times. Sugars are carbs, and there's lots of different kinds of sugars. We have the typical table sugar, which is sucrose. We also have lactose, which is the sugar found in milk. We have maltose, glucose, fructose. Think about high fructose corn syrup. Fructose is a sugar, so it's high in fructose sugar. But something that we think about in our cupboard, we have sugar. This is white sugar. There's also brown sugar, and there's light brown sugar and there's dark brown sugar. Basically, in the process of purifying your sugar, you start off with sugar cane or sugar beet, and you're processing that sugar cane or sugar beet to eventually get down to that purified sugar. And you start off with something dark brown, and as you purify it more and more, you're getting rid of more of the brown color, so it starts off as dark brown and then light brown, and then eventually it becomes a white sugar. So molasses is part of that process. It's a byproduct, and if you wanted to make a dark brown or a light brown sugar in your kitchen, you could simply take some white sugar and add molasses to it. So you're really combining those two to get back to the original. Of course, it's not going to be exactly the same as the original, but it is the easiest way if you had those two things in your cupboard. Or you could just go to the store and buy dark brown sugar. That's easy too. Nowadays, we've started to see more of evaporated cane sugar as a sweetener on labels. Honey is being used a lot, maple syrup, and then also brown rice syrup is another sweetener that has become more popular. All of these contain sugars, so they contain sucrose, they contain fructose and glucose. They're just at different percentages. So something like a high fructose, so let's just say sugar, so high fructose corn syrup, hope you can see this. So high fructose corn syrup is going to have both glucose and fructose in it, so you're combining both sweeteners. It's just the fact that it's high fructose, so that just means percentage wise you're going to have more fructose than you do glucose. But then also, if you have the sugar called, sorry, I'm a little sloppy here. You have the sugar called sucrose, which is your table sugar. Sucrose is a disaccharide, but it has two sugars chemically bonded to each other. The glucose and the fructose are actually bonded to each other, and that creates a sucrose. So a lot of these sweeteners actually have the same makeup. There's just different percentages of those actual sugars in there. So sucrose has glucose and fructose in it, but they're just combined together, whereas something like a high fructose corn syrup has glucose and fructose also in there, but they're separate, and the levels, you can have a high fructose corn syrup, you can have a high glucose corn syrup, you could just have regular corn syrup. But when it comes down to what's actually in there, glucose and fructose. The same thing with honey. Honey has the same two sugars in there. It's going to have glucose and fructose, but like I said, like the maple syrup, it also has water, has vitamins and minerals in there. The last thing I want to touch on is lactose intolerance. So lactose is a sugar, it's found in milk,
And there are some people that, let me see if I can find some room on this to write. Let's turn it sideways. So there are some people that are intolerant to lactose, and what that means is that you have lactose, which is a combination of glucose and galactose. And people who are intolerant, their bodies cannot, so these two are actually bonded together. So you have glucose and galactose that constitutes lactose. So in people who are lactose intolerant, they do not have the enzyme that breaks this down. So in our body, we consume lactose. In order for our body to properly digest lactose, we need to be able to break this down into the separate glucose and galactose so that our body can use it properly. So people who are intolerant, lactose intolerant, they either don't make the enzyme, they don't make enough of the enzyme, or the enzyme that does this just doesn't work properly. So the enzyme is called lactase. Excuse me for the poor handwriting here, but the enzyme is lactase. And with this enzyme, we have new products out there like Lactaid milk. You can actually have Lactaid pills that contain lactase that help people that are lactose intolerant if they take the pill before eating any dairy products, ice cream, cheese, anything like that, that might affect their body. Depending on how lactose intolerant you are, the cheese could affect you at small amounts, or the ice cream could affect you at large amounts. You know, it depends. There's a range on how lactose intolerant somebody can be, but it all stems with this enzyme. So something like a Lactaid milk, they process the milk, they add the enzyme so that the milk doesn't contain lactose, it contains glucose and galactose. And if you've ever tasted Lactaid milk, it's actually sweeter than regular milk because these two sugars are sweeter than lactose. So if you have a glass of regular milk, it contains lactose, which is a sugar. It sweetens it, but it's a very mild sweetness. Compare that to a glass of Lactaid milk, which does not have lactose. It has glucose and galactose, and it's much sweeter because both of these are sweeter than lactose. And it all has to do with the carbs. These are all carbs. Okay, so that's all that I'm going to teach today. A little bit about carbohydrates. There's plenty more to learn about, but this is just a little snippet of it. I hope to see you in the next video, and have a good day. Thanks.